The summer heat clung to Rome like a funeral shroud, thick and suffocating, as Aurelia Cassian stood before the bronze mirror in her father's villa. Her handmaidens worked in silence, weaving pearls through her dark hair, painting her lips the color of pomegranates, draping her in silk the shade of virgin snow. She looked like a bride. She felt like a sacrifice. "You should be grateful," her father had said that morning, his voice echoing through the marble atrium. Senator Lucius Cassian was a man carved from ambition and ice, his eyes perpetually calculating the worth of everything, including his only daughter. "Praetor Gaius Marius has chosen you. Do you understand what this means for our family? For our name?" Aurelia had understood perfectly. It meant she would be shackled to a man 3 decades her senior, a brute whose previous 2 wives had died under mysterious circumstances, whose cruelty was whispered about in every corner of the forum. It meant her life would become a gilded cage, her body a bargaining chip in her father's endless quest for political power. The marriage rite would begin at sunset, when the Senate gathered in the forum to witness the sacred tradition. Senators and praetors would select their brides from among the noble families, sealing alliances with a public kiss before the eyes of Rome. It was considered the highest honor, a union blessed by the gods themselves. Refusal was unthinkable. Rebellion was treason. But Aurelia Cassian had never been particularly good at obedience. She had spent the previous night sleepless, pacing her chambers like a caged lioness, turning over every possible escape in her mind. She could flee the city, but her father's reach extended throughout the Republic. She could poison herself, but cowardice tasted more bitter than hemlock. She could appeal to the emperor, but Septimus Draven had been campaigning in the East for 2 years, and Rome functioned well enough without him, or so the Senate believed. Then, as dawn broke over the 7 hills, an idea had crystallized in her mind with the clarity of madness. There was one law, ancient and absolute, that even her father could not circumvent: the law of first kiss. If a woman of marrying age willingly kissed a man before the marriage rite began, that man became her lawful husband by sacred decree. The law had been written centuries ago to prevent kidnappings and forced unions, a protection for women that had somehow survived Rome's endless hunger for conquest and control. If she kissed anyone before Gaius Marius claimed her, she would be untouchable. Ruined, certainly. Disgraced, absolutely. But free. The afternoon sun was beginning its descent when Aurelia slipped from her father's villa, her finest gown concealed beneath a plain cloak, her face hidden behind a veil. Her handmaiden, Julia, had tried to stop her, tears streaming down her weathered face. But Aurelia had pressed a purse of coins into her hands and whispered, "Tell him I've gone to pray at the temple. Tell him anything." The streets of Rome pulsed with life as she made her way toward the forum. Merchants hawked their wares, children darted between pillars, and the ever-present stench of bodies and incense hung heavy in the air. Aurelia moved through the crowd like a ghost, her heart hammering against her ribs, her mind repeating the same desperate prayer: "Let this work. Let this work. Let this work." Outside the forum, the city's outcasts gathered as they always did: beggars hoping for alms, slaves awaiting their masters, gladiators nursing wounds between games. Aurelia scanned their faces, searching for someone, anyone, who might serve her purpose. She needed a man desperate enough to accept her offer, someone with nothing to lose and everything to gain. She had brought gold, enough to change a poor man's life, enough to buy his cooperation and his silence. Most of the men lounging against the forum's outer wall were exactly what she expected: scarred, hollow-eyed, beaten down by Rome's merciless machinery. But one man stood apart from the rest, and something about him made Aurelia's breath catch in her throat. He sat in the shadow of a crumbling column, his body lean and hard beneath rough-spun cloth, his face half hidden by dark hair that fell past his shoulders. While the others begged and brawled, he remained utterly still, watching the crowd with an intensity that seemed to pierce through flesh and bone. When his gaze found hers across the chaos, Aurelia felt the world narrow to a single point of connection. His eyes were the color of storms, gray and fathomless and impossibly alive. They were not the eyes of a beggar. They were the eyes of a king. Aurelia approached him slowly, aware of the stares that followed her, aware that with every step she was crossing a threshold from which there could be no return. The man didn't move, didn't speak, simply watched her draw near with an expression she couldn't read. Up close, she could see the sharp planes of his face, the aristocratic line of his jaw, the old scars that marked his forearms like a soldier's map. "I have a proposition," she said quietly, crouching before him so that their faces were level. "I need you to kiss me, in public. Before sunset, I'll pay you enough gold to leave Rome, to start a new life anywhere you choose." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, slowly, deliberately, he leaned forward until his lips were inches from her ear. His voice was low and rough, threaded with something that might have been regret or resignation. "You don't know what you're asking." "I know exactly what I'm asking," Aurelia replied fiercely. "I'm asking for my freedom. Will you help me or not?" The man studied her with those unreadable storm-gray eyes, and Aurelia had the strangest sensation that he was memorizing her face, cataloging every detail for some purpose she couldn't fathom. Finally, he nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement. "I'll do it, but not for your gold." "Then why?" His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Because you're brave enough to destroy yourself for what you believe in. That's a quality Rome desperately needs." Before Aurelia could question his cryptic words, he rose to his feet with a fluid grace that belied his beggar's rags. He was taller than she'd expected, broad-shouldered and powerful, moving through the crowd with the unconscious authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. People parted for him instinctively, though none seemed to recognize what Aurelia was beginning to suspect, that this man was far more than he appeared. They walked together toward the forum center, where the marriage rite would soon begin. Already, senators were gathering, their togas brilliant white in the fading sunlight, their faces smug with anticipation. Aurelia spotted her father among them, standing beside Praetor Gaius Marius, whose expression promised a wedding night of horror. The crowd swelled around them as word spread a senator's daughter walking hand in hand with a beggar. Laughter rippled through the forum, cruel and sharp as broken glass. Aurelia felt her cheeks burn but kept her chin high, kept moving forward, kept her hand locked in the stranger's calloused grip. At the base of the Senate steps, she turned to face him. His eyes held hers, and in their depths she saw something that made her question everything, a sorrow so profound it seemed ancient, a resignation that spoke of sacrifices she couldn't imagine. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice barely audible above the jeering crowd. "Yes," Aurelia whispered. "I'm certain." The man reached up slowly, cupping her face with hands that were surprisingly gentle. His thumb traced the line of her jaw, and Aurelia felt her pulse hammer in her throat. She could hear her father shouting, could hear Gaius Marius cursing, could hear the entire city of Rome holding its breath. "Then forgive me," the stranger murmured, "for the deception I've woven." Before Aurelia could ask what he meant, he closed the distance between them and kissed her. His lips were cold at first, shock and sunset and something indefinably sad. But then warmth bloomed between them, spreading through Aurelia's chest like wildfire, and for one impossible moment the world fell away. There was no forum, no senate, no father screaming her name. There was only this, the taste of rebellion, the weight of consequence, the strange and terrible certainty that she had just changed the course of her life in ways she couldn't begin to comprehend. When he pulled back, the stranger's eyes were bright, with something that might have been tears or might have been triumph. He leaned close once more, his breath ghosting against her ear, and whispered two words that would haunt her dreams for months to come. "Forgive me." Then the guards were upon them, tearing them apart, and Aurelia's world shattered into chaos and screaming, and the iron grip of men who dragged her toward her father's rage. But even as they hauled her away, even as Rome erupted in scandal around her, Aurelia kept her eyes locked on the stranger's face. She had kissed a beggar to escape her fate. She had destroyed her reputation, shamed her family, and defied the most powerful men in Rome. And somehow, impossibly, she suspected she had done something far more dangerous than any of that. She had kissed an emperor. The guards' hands were iron shackles around Aurelia's arms as they dragged her through the forum, her feet barely touching the marble stones. Behind her, the crowd erupted into chaos, voices rising in shock and outrage, laughter cruel as broken glass. She could hear her father's roar above it all, a sound of pure fury that promised consequences she couldn't yet imagine. "Let me go." Aurelia struggled against her captors, twisting to catch one final glimpse of the stranger. But he had vanished, swallowed by the mob as completely as if he'd been a ghost, a desperate hallucination born of her own reckless heart. Had she imagined the weight of his gaze? The strange authority in his bearing? The cryptic warning whispered against her lips? "You foolish girl." Her father's voice cut through her thoughts like a blade. Senator Lucius Cassian stood before her, his face mottled with rage. "Do you have any idea what you've done? What you've cost this family?" Aurelia lifted her chin, meeting his fury with a calm she didn't feel. "I've saved myself from a marriage to a monster." The slap came so fast she didn't see it coming, only felt the explosive pain across her cheek. The sharp taste of blood. She staggered, but didn't fall. Wouldn't give him that satisfaction. The crowd gasped, then fell silent. "You've destroyed us." Lucius grabbed her throat, his fingers digging into bruised skin. "The law of first kiss may protect you from Praetor Marius, but it doesn't protect you from shame. You're ruined, Aurelia. Worthless. That beggar won't claim you. He's probably halfway to the Tiber." Laughing at the fool who threw herself at his feet, Aurelia wanted to argue, but his grip tightened, cutting off her air. Black spots danced at the edges of her vision. "Release her, Lucius." The cold voice belonged to Praetor Gaius Marius himself. The older man stepped forward, his scarred face twisted into something cruel. "She's no longer your concern, or mine." Lucius dropped Aurelia like contaminated goods. She fell to her knees, gasping, one hand pressed to her throat. Gaius circled her slowly, a predator examining prey. "By law, you belong to the man you kiss, some vagrant who's likely crawled back into his gutter. But your family's debt to me remains unpaid. Your father promised me an alliance, and he will deliver it with your younger sister, perhaps. Sweet little Claudia. She's what, 13? I've always preferred them young, eager to please." Horror flooded through Aurelia. She'd been so focused on her own escape that she hadn't considered the cost to Claudia, her gentle sister who still believed the world could be kind. "No, leave her alone. She's a child. She's a woman by Roman law," Gaius interrupted, eyes glittering with malice. "And she'll be much easier to shape than you. I should thank you, Aurelia. Your rebellion has given me something far sweeter." He walked away, leaving Aurelia kneeling in the dust, her father's hatred burning into her back. What had she done? She'd saved herself only to damn Claudia to the fate she'd been fleeing. They locked her in her chambers that night. Guards posted outside her door. Julia brought water and bandages, weeping silently as she tended Aurelia's bruises. Neither spoke what was there to say. Aurelia lay awake through the darkness, staring at the ceiling. The stranger's face haunted her, those storm-gray eyes, that whispered apology, the inexplicable sadness that radiated from him. "Forgive me." What had he meant? Dawn broke gray and cheerless. Aurelia had just begun to drift into exhausted sleep when marching boots jolted her awake. Not household guards, something military. Something that made the villa tremble. Her door crashed open. Julia screamed. Aurelia shot upright to find herself surrounded by men in crimson cloaks and golden armor, the Praetorian Guard, the Emperor's personal soldiers. "Aurelia Cassian," the lead guard announced, his voice echoing inside his helmet. "You are summoned to the Imperial Palace, by order of Emperor Septimus Draven. You will come willingly, or you will be carried." Aurelia's heart stopped. The Emperor? Septimus Draven was supposed to be in the East, fighting barbarians. He hadn't been in Rome for 2 years. Why would he summon her? Unless, no, it wasn't possible. "I'll come willingly," she heard herself say. They dressed her in white silk and bound her wrists with cords, a courtesy that felt ominous. Her father tried to follow, but guards blocked his path with crossed spears. "The Emperor wishes to see the girl alone," the lead guard said. "You will await his pleasure, Senator, and pray he shows mercy." The streets were waking as they escorted her through Rome. Merchants stopped to stare. Mothers pulled children close. Word spread like wildfire. The senator's daughter was being taken to the palace. Some faces showed pity. Others showed fear. The imperial palace rose above the city like a golden mountain, all marble and bronze, and architectural glory. Aurelia had never been inside its walls. Her family's status was too low. Now she climbed its steps as a prisoner, her guard's armor throwing rainbows across white stone. Inside was a labyrinth of wealth and power, silk hangings in purple and gold, mosaics depicting conquest, statues of gods and emperors, their marble eyes judging. The Praetorians led her deeper, through corridors where senators' daughters weren't meant to walk, past chambers where nations' fates were decided. Finally, they stopped before massive bronze doors engraved with scenes of military triumph. The lead guard knocked once thunder in sudden silence. "Enter," came a voice from within. A voice Aurelia recognized. A voice that confirmed her worst fear and strangest hope. The doors swung open. Aurelia was pushed gently into the chamber beyond a war room covered in maps and battle plans, weapons hanging on walls. And at the center stood the man she'd kissed in the forum. But he wasn't dressed in rags anymore. He wore the armor of an emperor, gleaming breastplate, embossed with eagles, crimson cloak clasped with a golden lion, a crown of laurels on dark hair. He looked like Mars descended to Earth, beautiful and terrible and utterly real. Septimus Draven, Emperor of Rome, turned to face her with those same storm-gray eyes. "Hello, Aurelia," he said quietly. "I believe we need to talk about our marriage." For a long moment, Aurelia couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. She'd kissed the emperor. She'd grabbed the most powerful man in the world and inadvertently married him before half of Rome. "No," she whispered. "That's not possible. You were in the East. Everyone was wrong." Septimus moved with that same predatory grace. "I returned 3 months ago, disguised. I wanted to see my city through my people's eyes, to understand their truths. So, I became one of them, a beggar, a ghost." He stopped close enough that she could see exhaustion etched around his eyes. "And then you appeared. This fierce, desperate girl willing to destroy everything for freedom. You offered a stranger gold and hope and rebellion. How could I refuse? You should have told me." Aurelia's shock transformed into anger. "You knew what this would cost. Would you have believed me?" Septimus challenged. "Would you have kissed me knowing the consequences? Or would you have run, chosen Gaius Marius, died in misery?" He was right. She would have thought him mad. "The law of first kiss is absolute," Septimus continued. "You are my wife, Aurelia. By the decree you invoked, you're now bound to me," and all Rome watched. "So what happens now?" Her voice was steady, though her hands shook. "Annulment? Execution? No." Septimus studied his maps. "You will remain my wife in title, before Rome's eyes. You'll live in the palace, play empress. In 1 year, I'll grant you divorce, and enough wealth for independence. Your family's debts forgiven. Your sister protected. And you will be free." It was more than she'd hoped for. "And in the meantime, we survive," Septimus said grimly. "The Senate wants blood. My advisors want answers. My enemies are sharpening their knives." He crossed to her, and for a moment she saw not the emperor but the man beneath the one who'd sat in shadows, watching the world with sad eyes. 1 year of your life, for everyone you love safety. 1 year of pretending, then freedom. Will you accept? Aurelia thought of Claudia, of her dead mother, of the kiss that started this impossible mess. "I'll accept," she said. "But I want the truth. No more secrets. Treat me as a partner, not a pawn." Septimus studied her, then extended his hand, not emperor to subject, but equal to equal. "Agreed. Partners for 1 year. May the gods have mercy on us both." Aurelia placed her hand in his, feeling a soldier's calluses, a man's warmth. She'd kissed a stranger to escape her fate. Instead, she'd bound herself to an emperor, and somehow, she suspected this was exactly where she was always meant to be. The war room felt smaller with Septimus standing so close, his presence filling the space like a gathering storm. Aurelia's hand remained in his, neither moving to break the contact, as if the simple touch was the only anchor keeping them both from being swept away by the chaos they'd created. "Your chambers have been prepared," Septimus said finally, releasing her hand and stepping back. The absence of his touch left her skin cold. "But there are things you need to understand before you step beyond these doors." He moved to the window, gazing out over Rome as it spread beneath the palace like a living tapestry. The morning sun gilded the terracotta roofs, the marble temples, the Tiber snaking through it all like silver. From this height, the city looked peaceful, magnificent. But Aurelia was beginning to understand that surfaces in Rome were always lies. "The Senate believes I've been in the East," Septimus continued, his voice low and measured. "They think I returned only yesterday, that I summoned you out of curiosity. They don't know I was the man you kissed. They cannot know." Aurelia's breath caught. "What?" "But the entire forum saw—" "The forum saw a senator's daughter kiss a beggar," Septimus interrupted, turning to face her. "They were too far away to see his face clearly, too shocked by your audacity to study the man himself. My guard, the few who know the truth, are loyal beyond question. They'll keep this secret. So what will you tell them? A ghost of a smile touched Septimus's lips. I tell them a version of truth, that I returned to find Rome scandalized by your rebellion, that I investigated your circumstances, that I was moved by your courage. I invoked ancient law to claim you as my bride, superseding your kiss with a beggar through imperial authority. Will they believe that? I'm the emperor. They don't need to believe, they only need to obey. He moved back to his table, studying the maps there. But that doesn't mean they won't resist. The Senate has grown comfortable in my absence. Your elevation to empress will be seen as a threat to their authority. He looked up, pinning her with storm-gray eyes. Which means you are in danger, Aurelia. Not just from scandal, but from men who would see you dead to maintain their control over Rome. The words should have terrified her, but stronger than fear was a growing sense of purpose, of stepping into a role she'd never asked for but somehow recognized. Then we'll need to be careful, she said quietly. Both of us. Septimus studied her, something like approval flickering across his features. You're not what I expected. Neither are you. Aurelia moved closer to the table, examining the maps. She recognized some Gaul, Britannia, the Eastern Territories. You said you disguised yourself to understand your people's truths. What truths did you find? For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then Septimus sighed, the sound carrying the weight of empires. I found a city eating itself from within, he said quietly. Senators hoarding grain while children starve, praetors extracting bribes for justice, guards ignoring crimes by the wealthy. I found corruption so deep, I began to wonder if Rome could even be saved. His hands flattened against the table, knuckles white. But I also found people like you. People who still believe in something beyond power and gold. People willing to sacrifice everything for those they love. It's those people who give me hope that Rome might still have a future worth fighting for. Aurelia heard the exhaustion beneath his words, the loneliness of a man who'd walked among his subjects and found himself more alone than ever. The beggar you became, she said carefully. Was that your only disguise? Septimus's lips curved. No. I've worn many faces these past months. A merchant, a soldier, a gladiator. Once, though that didn't last long, I'm too recognizable in the arena. He paused. That's why I was near the forum yesterday. I'd been watching the marriage rite preparations, witnessing how the Senate treats noble daughters like commodities. When you approached me, I should have refused. But something in your eyes. He trailed off, leaving the thought unfinished, hanging between them like an unanswered question. A knock shattered the moment. Septimus's expression shifted instantly, becoming the cold mask of an emperor. Enter, the doors opened, to admit a man in senatorial robes, his gray hair precisely trimmed, his face carved from patrician arrogance. He bowed to Septimus, barely then let his gaze slide to Aurelia with undisguised contempt. Emperor, the man said, his voice smooth as poisoned honey. I see the rumors are true. You've actually brought the Cassian girl to the palace. Senator Valerius, Septimus replied, his tone giving nothing away. I don't recall summoning you. The entire Senate is in uproar, Caesar. This girl violated sacred tradition, and now you reward her disgrace with imperial favor? The precedent, this sets, the precedent, Septimus interrupted, his voice dropping to something dangerous, is that I am emperor, and I will choose my consort as I see fit. Or have you forgotten who holds authority in Rome? Valerius's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in his eyes. Of course not, Caesar. But the girl's father is a minor senator of questionable loyalty. Her family has no military connections, no wealth, no political value. Is this truly the woman you wish standing beside you as empress? My wishes are not subject to Senate approval, Septimus said flatly. Aurelia Cassian is now under imperial protection. Anyone who threatens her threatens me. I trust that message will reach your colleagues? Valerius bowed again, deeper but no more sincere. Of course, Caesar. We live only to serve Rome. His gaze slid to Aurelia. Welcome to the palace, Lady Aurelia. I hope you find your stay educational. He left, his footsteps echoing like a countdown to something inevitable. Aurelia released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. He's going to be a problem. Valerius is always a problem, Septimus agreed grimly. He's been angling for power since before I took the throne, using my absence to consolidate support. He sees you as a weakness, a crack in my armor he can exploit. Then, we need to prove him wrong." Aurelia surprised herself with the certainty in her voice. "If I'm to play Empress, I need to understand the game, the players, the rules, the hidden moves. You said you wanted a partner. Let me be one." Septimus studied her with those penetrating eyes. Weighing, measuring, evaluating. "Most people in your position would be begging to leave," he said quietly. "But you want to dive deeper into the serpent's nest. Why?" Aurelia thought of Claudia, still under their father's rage and Gaius Marius's threat. She thought of her mother's stories, of women who'd stepped between armies to forge peace. She thought of the beggar who'd whispered forgiveness for sins she hadn't yet understood. "Because running away never saved anyone," she said simply. "And because you're right, Rome is eating itself. Maybe I can't fix it. Maybe I'll fail and be forgotten. But at least I'll have tried. At least I'll have stood for something beyond my own survival." For the first time since she'd entered the war room, Septimus smiled a real smile, warm and surprised and almost boyish. It transformed his face, stripping away years of imperial weight. "Then let's begin your education, partner," he said. "Rome won't wait for us to be ready. But first, you need to meet the one person in this palace I trust completely." He moved to the door and spoke quietly to the guards. Moments later, a woman entered, elderly, her hair white as snow, her back straight as a legion standard. She wore simple robes, but something in her bearing suggested she'd once worn something grander. "Aurelia Cassian," Septimus said. "Meet Cassia. She was my mother's closest friend, my teacher, and now my most trusted advisor. If anyone can teach you to survive this court, it's her." The old woman's eyes were sharp as they examined Aurelia, missing nothing, not the bruises on her throat, not the defiance in her posture, not the fear she was trying to hide. Then Cassia smiled, and it was like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. "So you're the girl who kissed an emperor and didn't know it," she said, her voice rich with amusement. "Oh, my dear, we're going to have such an interesting year." Cassia's chambers were smaller than Aurelia expected, tucked away in a quiet corner of the palace, where marble gave way to worn stone and imperial grandeur softened into something almost comfortable. The old woman moved with practiced efficiency, pouring wine into simple clay cups while Aurelia perched on a cushioned bench, her body rigid with exhaustion. "Drink," Cassia commanded, pressing a cup into Aurelia's hands. "You look like you're about to shatter, and we can't have the new empress collapsing on her first day. The vultures would feast on that for months." Aurelia took a sip, the wine warming her throat where her father's fingers had left their mark. "I'm not really the empress. This is all temporary. A bargain." "Everything in Rome is temporary, child." Cassia settled into a chair across from her, studying Aurelia with sharp, knowing eyes. "Emperors fall. Dynasties crumble. What matters isn't how long you wear the crown. It's what you do while it sits on your head." "Septimus said you would teach me to survive." "Septimus is an optimist," Cassia said dryly. "I'll teach you to fight. Survival is the bare minimum, and the bare minimum gets you killed in this palace." She leaned forward, her voice dropping. "Tell me, what do you know about the emperor? Not the stories, the man." Aurelia thought of storm-gray eyes and whispered apologies, of a beggar who'd moved like a king. "I know he's lonely. I know he's searching for something he can't find. And I know he's more dangerous than he appears." Cassia's lips curved into a satisfied smile. "Good. You see clearly. That will keep you alive." She sipped her wine. Septimus Draven became emperor at 23, after his father was poisoned, a conspiracy that reached into the Senate itself. He spent his first 5 years rooting out traitors, executing conspirators, trying to rebuild trust in an institution designed to betray him. Is that why he left Rome? To escape the Senate? Partially. But also to prove himself as a military commander, to show Rome he was more than his father's frightened son. Cassia's expression grew distant. "I watched that boy grow up, Aurelia. I watched him transform from a gentle child who loved philosophy into a man who could order executions without flinching. The crown changes everyone who wears it." "You're warning me," Aurelia said quietly, "about getting too close to him." "I'm preparing you," Cassia corrected. "Septimus offered you a bargain 1 year, then freedom. But bargains made in palaces become cages. The longer you stay, the harder it becomes to leave. A knock interrupted them. A servant entered, bowing. Lady Cassia, the Emperor requests Lady Aurelia's presence in the throne room. The Senate has assembled for formal audience. Aurelia's stomach dropped. Now? But I'm not ready. You're never ready, Cassia said, rising smoothly. That's the point. They want to see you stumble. Come, I'll help you dress for battle. 20 minutes later, Aurelia stood before a bronze mirror, barely recognizing her reflection. Cassia's servants had transformed her from a bruised, frightened girl into something almost imperial. Her hair was arranged in elaborate braids, woven with gold. Her stola was deep purple, not quite royal purple, but close enough to make a statement. Jewelry glittered at her throat and wrists, covering bruises, creating armor from precious metals. Remember, Cassia said, adjusting Aurelia's stola one final time. You don't need to say anything. Just stand beside Septimus, keep your chin high, and let them wonder what you're thinking. Mystery is more powerful than words. And if they attack me directly, then you smile, Cassia said, her own smile sharp as a blade. And remember that you've already done what none of them dared. You defied Rome's expectations and survived. That makes you dangerous. The throne room was massive, its ceiling lost in shadows, its walls lined with columns stretching toward the heavens. Senators filled the space, their white togas bright against dark marble, their faces turned toward the golden throne where Septimus sat in full imperial regalia. He looked nothing like the beggar. He looked like Mars himself, terrible and beautiful and utterly untouchable. When Aurelia entered, the room fell silent. Every eye turned to assess her, to judge her, to find her wanting. She felt their contempt like physical weight, pressing down, trying to make her bow, make her break. But she thought of Claudia and kept walking. A smaller throne had been placed beside Septimus's new, hastily crafted, but unmistakably meant for an empress. Aurelia climbed the dais and took her seat. Only then did she look at Septimus. He met her gaze, and something passed between them. Understanding? Solidarity? Perhaps approval. Then he turned to address the Senate, his voice carrying through the chamber. Senators of Rome, Septimus began. I have called this audience to address concerns regarding my choice of consort. Let me be clear. Aurelia Cassian is now under my protection and bears the title of Empress. Any who question this decision question my authority as Emperor. Senator Valerius stepped forward, his expression carefully neutral. Caesar, we question nothing. We merely seek to understand. The Empress has no political connections, no military value, no dowry worth mentioning. Traditionally, imperial marriages strengthen alliances. What does this union accomplish beyond sentiment? It accomplishes, Septimus said coldly, exactly what I intend. Or have you forgotten, Valerius, that I need neither the Senate's permission nor its approval? I am not some merchant negotiating a transaction. I am your emperor. Of course, Caesar. Valerius bowed, but his eyes glittered with malice. Though one cannot help but wonder if the Empress's recent behavior suggests instability. A woman who would kiss a vagrant in public, who would shame her own family. Enough. The word cracked through the chamber like a whip. Septimus rose from his throne. Suddenly, every inch the warrior who'd conquered barbarian kings. You speak of shame, Valerius? Let's discuss shame. Let's discuss the grain shortages that plague common quarters while senatorial warehouses overflow. Let's discuss the bribes your colleagues extract from citizens seeking justice. Let's discuss how the Senate has operated in my absence, enriching yourselves while Rome's people starve. The chamber erupted into chaos. Senators shouting denials. Others calling for order. Aurelia sat frozen, watching Septimus command the room with nothing but voice and presence, wielding power like the weapon it was. This audience is concluded, Septimus declared. The Senate will assemble tomorrow to discuss reforms I am implementing. Mandatory grain distribution. Limits on senatorial land acquisition. Oversight of provincial governors. And you will approve these reforms, or you will discover exactly how temporary your positions truly are. He turned and offered Aurelia his hand. She took it, rising, allowing him to lead her from the throne room, while the Senate churned like a disturbed nest of vipers. Only when they were safely in the corridor did Septimus release her hand and lean against the wall, exhaling slowly. Well, he said, that went about as well as expected. They hate me, Aurelia said quietly. They'll do anything to remove me. Yes, Septimus agreed, which is why we need to move quickly. I have allies in the Senate, not many, but enough. And I have the Legion's loyalty, which matters more than political maneuvering. But you're right to be afraid. Valerius and his faction won't stop until one of us is destroyed. He studied her with those penetrating eyes. Are you certain you want this, Aurelia? I can still send you away, somewhere safe, where the Senate can't reach you. You could have your freedom now, instead of waiting a year. Aurelia thought about running, about hiding, about spending her life looking over her shoulder while Claudius suffered and Rome continued to rot. She thought about the beggar who'd sat in shadows, searching for truth. I'm certain, she said, though I'm starting to suspect this bargain of ours will cost more than either of us anticipated. Septimus smiled sad and knowing and resigned. All the best bargains do. 3 weeks passed, in a blur of ceremonies and silent warfare. Aurelia learned to navigate the palace's treacherous corridors, to smile at senators who wished her dead, to wear the mask of empress while her heart remained that of a trapped girl counting days until freedom. Cassia proved a merciless teacher, drilling her in court protocol, political alliances, and the subtle art of saying nothing while appearing to say everything. But it was the evenings Aurelia found most unsettling, the quiet hours, when she and Septimus dined alone in his private chambers, separated from the palace's prying eyes. They spoke of strategy and Senate politics, of grain distributions and military deployments, yet beneath every conversation ran an undercurrent neither acknowledged, the way his eyes lingered on her face when he thought she wasn't looking, the way her pulse quickened when his hand brushed hers reaching for wine. This was not part of the bargain. You're distracted? Septimus observed one evening, setting down his cup. They sat in his study, maps and documents scattered between them, the remains of their meal forgotten. Outside, Rome glittered in the darkness, 1,000 fires burning against the night. I'm thinking about tomorrow, Aurelia replied, which wasn't entirely a lie. Tomorrow was the Festival of Concordia, a massive public celebration where she would appear beside Septimus before all of Rome for the first time since their marriage announcement. Cassia says the crowds will be enormous. They will be. The people are curious about their new empress. Septimus leaned back, studying her. Are you afraid? Terrified, Aurelia admitted. What if they reject me? What if I say something wrong, do something that makes them hate me more than they already do? Then, you'll survive it, just as you've survived everything else. He rose and moved to the window, his silhouette dark against the city lights. Do you know what I see when I look at you, Aurelia? She shook her head, not trusting her voice. I see someone who refused to be broken, who faced impossible choices and made the hard one, consequences be damned. I see courage that most men, most emperors will never possess. He turned to face her, and in the lamplight his features were softer, more vulnerable than she'd ever seen them. That's why they fear you. Not because you're unworthy, but because you remind them what they've become: cowards, hiding behind tradition and power. Aurelia stood, closing the distance between them before she could question the impulse. You're not like them. You could have ignored me in the forum, walked away, let me face my fate, but you didn't. I had selfish reasons, Septimus said quietly. I saw you defying the world and thought, perhaps if someone that brave believes Rome is worth saving, perhaps I was right to keep fighting for it. They stood inches apart, the air between them charged with something dangerous, something that felt like standing at the edge of a precipice. Aurelia could feel the warmth radiating from his body, could see the pulse beating at his throat, could smell cedar and leather and something uniquely him, Septimus. A crash shattered the moment. Glass exploded inward as something heavy smashed through the window. Septimus moved faster than thought, throwing Aurelia to the ground and covering her body with his own as shards rained down around them. Shouts erupted in the corridor. Praetorian guards burst through the door, swords drawn, surrounding them in a wall of crimson and steel. One held an object that had come through the window, a clay vessel, now broken, with a message tied around its neck. Septimus rose slowly, helping Aurelia to her feet, his hands checking her for injuries with surprising gentleness. Are you hurt? No. I'm fine. But her voice shook, betraying the lie. Blood trickled from a cut on her arm where glass had grazed her. The guard captain approached, face grim behind his helmet, and handed Septimus the message. The emperor's expression went cold as he read, his jaw tightening until muscle jumped beneath skin. What does it say? Aurelia asked. Septimus crumpled the parchment in his fist. A warning. The false empress will fall, and Rome will be cleansed. Signed with the mark of the Senate traditionalists. Valerius. Aurelia breathed. We don't know that, Septimus said. But his tone suggested otherwise. He turned to the guard captain. Double the watch. No one enters these chambers without my explicit permission. And find out how someone got close enough to the palace to throw that without being seen. Yes, Caesar. The guards filed out, leaving them alone again in the ruined study. Aurelia looked at the broken window, at the message still clenched in Septimus's hand, and felt something shift inside her chest. This wasn't a game anymore. Someone had just tried to kill her, or at least to terrify her into fleeing, and they'd nearly succeeded. I should tend that cut, Septimus said, his voice gentler now. He retrieved a clean cloth and a basin of water, gesturing for her to sit. When she did, he knelt before her, carefully cleaning the wound with a soldier's practiced efficiency. His touch was surprisingly tender for hands that had wielded swords, that had commanded armies, that had signed death warrants. Aurelia watched his face as he worked the concentration in his eyes, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead, the old scars that marked his knuckles. Why are you really doing this? She asked quietly. Not the political reasons, not the strategic advantages. Why did you agree to my desperate plan in the forum? Septimus's hands stilled. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then, without looking up, he said, Because I was tired of being alone. Because I'd spent 3 months walking among my people and realized that I'd forgotten what it meant to connect with another person, to trust someone beyond their usefulness to the throne. He finally met her eyes. Because when you knelt before me, you saw a man, not an emperor, and I'd forgotten I could be both. Aurelia's breath caught. This was the truth she'd sensed beneath all his careful words. The vulnerability he kept locked behind imperial armor. He wasn't just Rome's emperor. He was a man drowning in duty, starving for something real. I see you, she whispered. Both of you. The emperor and the man. Septimus's hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. They were crossing a line neither could uncross, stepping past their careful bargain into something uncharted and terrifying. This wasn't supposed to happen, he said, his voice rough. No, Aurelia agreed. It wasn't, but neither of them pulled away. The sound of running feet in the corridor broke the spell. The guard captain returned, his face urgent. Caesar, we found something. You need to see this. Septimus rose immediately, his expression hardening back into the emperor's mask. But before he turned away, he squeezed Aurelia's hand, once a silent promise that they would finish this conversation. As she watched him stride from the room, barking orders, commanding his guards, Aurelia pressed her hand to her chest where her heart hammered like a war drum. She'd come to the palace planning to survive 1 year and walk away, but somewhere between the throne room confrontations and quiet dinners, between Cassia's lessons and Septimus's rare smiles, she'd begun to care. About Rome, about its people, about the lonely emperor who carried the world on his shoulders. And that, she realized with growing certainty, was far more dangerous than any assassin's blade. The festival of Concordia dawned bright and merciless, the sun beating down on Rome like a hammer on an anvil. Aurelia stood in her chambers while servants dressed her in cloth of gold, fabric so fine it seemed woven from light itself. Every layer felt like armor, every jewel a weapon she didn't know how to wield. You look like a goddess, Julia whispered, her eyes bright with tears. The handmaid had been allowed to visit, though guards watched her every movement. Is there news of Claudia? Aurelia asked quietly, adjusting the golden diadem that marked her as empress. Julia's expression darkened. The betrothal to Praetor Marius has been formally announced. The wedding is set for the new moon, 2 weeks. Aurelia had 2 weeks to save her sister, or Claudia would suffer the fate she'd escaped. The knowledge burned in her chest like swallowed fire. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Septimus entered, resplendent in imperial purple and gold, a crown of laurels resting on his dark hair. But she saw the tension in his shoulders, the shadow in his eyes. We need to talk, he said, dismissing the servants. When they were alone, he moved to the window. The guards found evidence last night. The vessel came from a building owned by Senator Marcus Flavius, one of Valerius's closest allies. Then arrest him, Aurelia said. It's not that simple. Flavius claims the building was empty, that anyone could have accessed it, without proof. Arresting a senator would make me look like a tyrant. Septimus turned to face her. So we do something better. Today at the festival, you will stand beside me before 100,000 people. You will show them that their empress cannot be intimidated. Aurelia felt her stomach twist. You're using me as bait. I'm asking you to be brave, Septimus corrected. The Praetorian Guard will surround us. I've personally selected every soldier within 50 feet of you. You can't promise nothing will happen. No, he admitted. But I can promise I will stand beside you. That if anything happens, I will protect you with my life. Is that enough? Aurelia studied his face, seeing sincerity there, determination, and something else. Something that looked like the emotion they'd almost acknowledged the night before. She thought about running, but also about Claudia, about the people starving while senators hoarded grain, about a lonely emperor trying to save a city. It's enough, she said quietly. Let's show them what an empress looks like. The forum had been transformed into a sea of humanity. Citizens packed every available space, climbing columns, perching on rooftops, filling the streets until Rome seemed to pulse with a single collective heartbeat. The noise was deafening cheers and jeers, prayers and curses. Aurelia walked beside Septimus through the crowd, Praetorian guards forming a protective corridor. She kept her chin high, her expression serene, even as her heart hammered. Every face could hide an enemy, every hand could hold a blade. You're doing perfectly, Septimus murmured. They can't look away from you. It was true. She could feel the weight of their stares, could hear the whispers spreading, the beggar's bride, the senator's shame, the unlikely empress. Let them whisper. She was done apologizing for surviving. They reached the raised platform where ceremonies would take place. Ascending the steps as priests chanted prayers to Concordia, Septimus took his place at the center, and Aurelia stood beside him, their hands clasped for all to see. People of Rome, Septimus's voice rang out. Today we celebrate Concordia, the harmony that binds us. But true harmony cannot exist where injustice thrives, where the powerful feast while children starve. The crowd shifted uneasily. This wasn't the standard festival speech. I have returned to find our city divided. Senators enriching themselves while citizens suffer. Laws applied selectively to favor the wealthy. He paused. Today that ends. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, confusion, excitement, fear. I hereby decree immediate distribution of grain from senatorial warehouses to all citizens in need. I establish new courts where common people can seek justice without paying bribes. The Senate will vote on comprehensive reforms, or I will implement them by decree. The crowd erupted, some cheering wildly, others shouting in outrage. Aurelia saw senators in the forum's edges, their faces purple with rage. Valerius stood among them, his expression murderous. Then she saw movement, a figure pushing through the crowd, moving with purpose toward the platform. Her heart lurched. Septimus. He'd seen it too. Guards moved to intercept, but the figure was fast, desperate. A blade flashed in the sunlight. Time slowed. The assassin broke through the guard line, his dagger aimed at Septimus's heart. Without thinking, Aurelia threw herself forward. She felt impact, not the blade, but Septimus's body colliding with hers, as he shoved her aside. They fell together, hitting the platform hard as the dagger sliced through empty air. Praetorian guards swarmed the assassin, bearing him to the ground. Screams echoed through the forum as the crowd panicked. Aurelia lay beneath Septimus, his weight pressing her into cold marble, his heart hammering against her chest. Their faces were inches apart, both breathing hard, both alive. Are you hurt? He demanded, frantically checking her for wounds. No. Are you? She touched his face, needing to confirm he was real, solid, unharmed. I'm fine. You saved my life. His voice was rough with emotion. You threw yourself at an armed assassin for me. You would have done the same, Aurelia said. You have done the same. Around them, guards shouted orders, secured the platform. But in that moment, surrounded by chaos, they existed in a bubble of perfect clarity. I can't do this anymore, Septimus said hoarsely. I can't pretend this is just a bargain, that you're just a political necessity. Somewhere between the throne room and last night and right now, you became everything, Aurelia finished. You became everything. He kissed her then, there on the platform before all of Rome, his lips claiming hers with desperate intensity. It wasn't the cold kiss from the forum. It was fire, and need. And the collision of two people who'd been fighting gravity for too long. When they broke apart, the crowd's roar had transformed. What had been chaos became cheering, deafening approval. The people had witnessed their empress risk death to save their emperor. They'd seen a love story written in blood and courage. Septimus helped Aurelia to her feet, and together they faced Rome. His hand found hers, fingers intertwining. "People of Rome," Septimus called out, "behold your empress, not chosen by politics or tradition, but by courage, by sacrifice, by love." The crowd's approval shook the very stones of the forum. Aurelia looked at the man beside her, no longer just an emperor, no longer just a bargain, but the person who'd somehow become her partner, her match, her fate. The girl who'd kissed a stranger to escape her destiny had instead found it. And Rome, watching, began to believe that perhaps their unlikely empress might be exactly what they needed.